What do you need to know when you are transitioning out of breastfeeding, both for mom and for baby?
If you're wanting or needing to completely stop breastfeeding, it kind of depends from the mom's perspective. It's going to depend on how much nursing the baby's doing. Generally, unless there's a medical emergency, you don't want to stop abruptly because your breasts are going to be really full and painful. Um, Usually, if you drop one feeding, and then wait a few days and let your breasts accommodate to that, and then drop another feeding. And of course, as you're dropping the feeding for the baby, you're going to replace that with pumped milk if you have it, or formula, again, depending on the baby's age. So if you're in a place where you're wanting to stop breastfeeding, I generally say, if you're not certain how to do it, give the warm line a call, because then we can talk to you about where you are, how much you're feeding, what you're feeding, how old your baby is, what your circumstances are, and help you tailor make a plan that'll keep you comfortable, so your breasts don't get overly full and keep the baby adequately nourished. But it's generally a gradual process. Anybody else want to add anything else?
I'll add on that too. I often want to ask the moms, which feeding are they having the least success with? So maybe it's they going back to work and they don't have a supportive environment to pump, and so they think that feeding would be replaced by formula. If that's not the case and they just aren't really sure, I have the last feeding that they will give up will be their most enjoyable one, and that's usually the one that's either first thing in the morning or last thing at night. And so I kind of do a slow transition to that. If a mom just feels like how personally I just didn't have enough and I knew that I was going to have to stop nursing, I would nurse as much as I could and top it off. And then again, the time of day that I had less and less milk, I would just add more and more formula. And I would still, if I was home doing the feeding, I would still pretend I was breastfeeding, but be giving a bottle of formula at that time. So that's usually how I suggest that.
That's great. And again, even just sharing my personal experience with that, my most enjoyable time breastfeeding was actually when I started formula feeding during the day while I was work, so I didn't have to deal with pumping. And I did pumping for a long time and I thought it was great, but at about 7 or 8 months, my supply had gone down so much and it was adding too much stress. So I ended up feeding formula during the day, and then in the mornings and nights when I was home with the baby nursing. And I did that all the way through 16 to 17 months. It was the most stress-free and best time I had nursing was actually during that time when I slowly was weaning off. So just to share a personal experience. Let's see, we've got some other questions. So how long should we wait before alternating between bottle and breastfeeding? So that's a great question. I think, again, it depends on circumstance, but I'll let somebody else jump in here.
Well, I would say what they mean between alternating. Are they wanting to space out? They want to start doing it at a certain age. Cindy, you can chime in on this. We generally recommend that they don't introduce a bottle of formula and start the alternating until they've really established the breastfeeding first, which takes about a month to get used to your new loved one at home. So we generally don't encourage any sort of bottles, whether it be with breast milk or formula, until after that first month period. And again, I think alternating for us means, what are the reasons between alternating? Why do you want to do that? What are the benefits? And then you make it very personal. I don't think there's any black or white answer. I think you need to talk with the family and say, why is this going to work better in your life? And let's talk through your day and let's see how this will work for you, and how we'll do the alternating. Is it, again, is it just morning and night? Is it so that dad can have a turn? Is it because mom doesn't have enough milk? Is it, what reason is it for that mom or parents to ask us why they want to alternate? I'll give it to you, Cindy.
No, I agree. I agree with Melissa. Generally speaking, if you can avoid introducing a bottle until the baby's really good at what they're doing and you're happy with your milk supply. For most moms, the first time around, that ends up being at about a month of age. But if there is a need to supplement that baby prior to that, or there's something happening that you can't be there for a feeding, we can teach you how to feed your baby with a spoon or a cup or a syringe. And if that works, but again, the feeding needs to be pleasant, successful, and doable for everybody involved. But yeah, generally about a month. If you know you're going to need to give your baby a bottle or you want to, that is a good time to introduce it. Sometimes if you wait until the baby's 2, 3, 4 months old, it can be a little bit more of a struggle. So it's a good idea to, if you know you're going to need to use a bottle, to start at about that point. You don't have to do it every day unless you want to. A couple of times a week is usually enough to keep the baby familiar with an alternative way of feeding. And every baby is so different. Some babies, they're so, they're happy to eat food no matter how you give it to them. And other babies are a little more particular. And again, that's where knowing your baby and trusting your instincts is really important.
There was a question earlier, which was around how do you know when the baby's done feeding? What cues are you looking for to know that they're actually full?
One of the things that at least I was taught was that a angry or hungry baby is kind of like tense. So like after they eat, they kind of flop, that whole milk drunk kind of like just that wonderful moment. I mean, when they stop too, like if they fall asleep, that was one of my signs was like when my baby fell asleep, and I would wake them up. I'm like, okay, no, you're done. Okay. So like a lot of times, honestly, like Pamela said, like the baby kind of leads the way. So yeah, again, if they're falling asleep, if they're content, if they're, yeah, those are the cues I looked for as a mom, and that I tell my clients to look for.
I agree with and underscore what Emerald just said. Sometimes the baby will let go. Some babies don't let go. They just keep sucking for comfort, but they're not really swallowing. And so again, I go back to that swallowing, and there are some babies who will keep one is sort of the early, I'll call it a yellow light, maybe not a red light sign, but if you have a newborn in the first couple of weeks and they are constantly on the breast, you can't put them down. You feed them for an hour, you put them down, 15 minutes later, they want to eat again. And that goes on and on and on. Sometimes that means that maybe they aren't being quite as efficient at transferring that milk. And so I always tell moms on the way out the door, if there's anything that's making you physically uncomfortable, uncertain, or feeding is unpleasant, reach out for help, if you're not sure, so we can help you figure out what's working for you. But it would be nice if they, if they had a little gauge that said, full, empty, half full, but it is variable, and that's part of it. I acknowledge that's part of what makes it challenging, but give a call if you're not sure.
I think you just came up with a new product idea, Cindy.
Oh, yeah, there are, but each baby's different.
Yeah, 100%. So we have a question here from Christina. I hope that answered your questions. If not, continue to put them in the Q&A. But I've been breastfeeding and supplementing with pumping. I have been using a bottle and the pace method of feeding. Since using a bottle, my baby has a little bit more difficulty latching. Any hints or tricks? I'm setting up a meeting with the warm line, but was curious in the meantime.
I would say to try to find a nipple that looks more like an actual mom's nipple. And that's what I try to stress to my clients. But also, that's one of those things, like bottles, you might go through every brand name bottle and your baby might take like the Playtex cheap one at the store. Like you don't know. And that's part of kind of learning your baby and kind of learning the process. But definitely try to find nipples that look more like a mom's actual nipple and not like the generic kind of skinny ones.
I agree with Emerald. Sometimes finding a bottle nipple that has a relatively short but symmetrical shaped nipple and then a gradual slope to a rounded base that's wide enough to encourage the baby to have a really wide open mouth when they're feeding with the bottle. And then whoever's offering that supplement, coaxing the baby to open widely, because in my experience, that's usually a bit of the struggle, is that they don't need to open as widely on most bottle nipples to still get the milk. And so sometimes they begin to want to feed more with a pursed lip rather than a really widely open mouth. So gently coaxing them to do that. And then also perhaps giving them just a little bit of milk before you bring them to the breast if they're getting fussy with the latch. Like I like to say, give them a little appetizer so they're not stressed out trying to latch. It's great. I think I saw that you're planning on trying to meet with someone to get some more help. Lots of skin to skin. I always say if the latch is a struggle, if it's a struggle, it's time to snuggle. No food fights. So yeah, keep the breast a happy place, or the breast and chest.
Beware also that the nipples have, the hole makes the milk come out like fast, out of like a faucet, and they have to do work to get the milk from your breast. So that's just something to be aware of, and to like check your nipple holes, that they aren't too large, and your baby isn't getting fed so fast that, you know, it gets used to that quick satiety. I think it's called, yes, satiated, yes. And then still will enjoy. I mean, when the feeding experience, breastfeeding, is enjoyable, I think, then infants also will desire it. They learn to desire that experience, as well as, you know, getting fed fast and furious from a bottle. So, you know, they long for that skin contact and for that warmth of mom and that kind of thing. So it's a lot of learned behavior. I think that's important to remember. And not necessarily by the book. You have your different kids, like Melissa said, can feed different ways. I know my 3 did as well. The middle child, I had nowhere to pump where I was working at that time. He himself switched all his feedings from the time I picked him up until the next morning. We didn't stay up and make a party of it. He just fed and went back to sleep, and he just kept feeding every couple of hours like that, from, you know, the time I got out of work. And so that he ate very little, if much, during the day, where he would normally be sleeping for a good 5-hour stretch at night and not eating. He just flipped that whole thing around. And you just have to be open to creative ways to getting, you know, they're all thriving. I think the issue comes if, for whatever reason, baby's not thriving, then you have to, you know, kind of alter your master plan and try and do something else to make sure. And that may mean supplementing. No shame in it. No shaming.
That's great. And then another question here, which I find really interesting, is any nutritional, I think this is something that people don't talk about much, any nutritional advice for the mom that is helpful with healthy breastfeeding? And I'd like to answer that question from, you know, leading up to breastfeeding. So prenatal nutrition, what can help you have a successful, you know, breastfeeding and motherhood journey, but then also while you're actually breastfeeding, what are the guidelines there on nutrition and caloric intake and things like that? I think there's a lot of mixed information out there. I know, Emerald, you hit on it a bit, like have that basket of snacks. You are eating pretty much nonstop. You need to be hydrated. But I'd love to have a couple people weigh in here.
We say you need to eat at least 500 more calories a day. It could very well be more than that. But that's not 500 calories of potato chips. So it's really important I tell my patients, you know, you were very particular about your nutrition when you were pregnant. You need to continue doing that in breastfeeding. Just do more of it. And hydration is super important because some folks are dehydrated. They're so busy trying to do all the tasks, they don't drink enough, and you need hydration to produce, to, you know, have a good milk supply. The diet itself depends on whether you are, on yourself, whether you're a protein eater or a vegetarian, or so, you kind of, if you've done research on what kind of eating you're doing, it usually will suffice. You just need to do just a little bit, probably more of it. And I have them continue taking prenatal vitamins because sometimes our diets are not balanced. And so just to make up for what you might be missing. And your pediatrician or your nurse practitioner your PNP may have some suggestions about that, what they want. Do you have well water? Do you have water with fluoride? All kinds of things like that, they can contribute. And you utilize them also. They don't usually consult us too much about that stuff as much as they do peds, because peds can tell them if the baby's thriving or gaining weight and looks, content or whatever. But I do, when I had my first baby, it was a PNP who reached out to me about 3 days after I took him home and said, I'm just calling to check on you. How are you doing? How is breastfeeding? What questions do you have? Because I learned all this stuff in the hospital, but now I'm applying it and I'm flying solo because I was the first person in my family to breastfeed in like forever, in decades. And so I had no one to turn to. And that information she gave me was invaluable. And so use your resources, reach out to your resources to, to find out that information. I don't know, Liz, if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, I just want to underscore what you're saying in terms of hydration. Water helps with almost every discomfort of pregnancy. So making sure you're drinking enough water, particularly now that the days are getting hot, you're getting more dehydrated than you think. And the same thing for breastfeeding, that water, filling a water bottle so that you have it with you at all times is just really important to keeping you feeling well and functioning.
In my practice, we see the moms and babies and dads, hopefully, after they've been discharged from the hospital after 2 or 3 days. And so we do talk with the moms about that. And Melissa, you heard me say this at one of our meetings, that parents will say, well, people keep wanting to do something for me. And now, especially with COVID-19, we say, ask them to drop off food and drop off things to drink to your house. Don't come in, don't say hello, but the best thing they can do for you is to feed you. One thing with the infant that we do supplement after 1 month of age is we have the mom supplement vitamin D. That's the only thing that we find that isn't enough in the breast milk for the baby. But we don't bother new moms with that right away. We'll talk about that as we hopefully will see you 2 or 3 times before the 1 month visit. But be assured that we see the baby enough that we know that you are providing enough nutrition to yourself, that we're giving enough nutrition through your breast milk so that your baby's thriving.
And I just want to say that the way I usually explain it to parents is that the science is such that the quality of your diet doesn't have a huge bearing on the quality of your milk. It makes a difference to the mother's well-being. And I think that's what others were saying as well. Women will sometimes be concerned that they don't have enough milk or their milk is not of great quality because they've had a hard time eating well for one or another reason. It can make a small difference, like the type of fats that you eat can influence the type of fats, unsaturated, saturated, in your breast milk. But by and large, you're going to make good quality milk. But if you're dehydrated and you're not well nourished, you're not going to have the wherewithal to do all that care, and it's going to take its toll on you. So yeah, I want you to not be worried that you're not providing adequately for your child. But like when you get on a plane and they do the safety precautions, if you're traveling with someone who needs oxygen, you put oxygen on yourself first so you're able to help them. Think the same way as a new mom, and it's hard. But yeah, you're going to be without sleep by definition to some degree, so you can't go without sleep and without good nutrition. So have people drop off food that you like.
Such a great point, and I love that oxygen mask analogy. I know people use it a lot, but it's so accurate. But one more question, and I think then we'll break here. I know we're 5 minutes over, but one more question, and this has come up a lot even within our community. I noticed some women use a manual pump. I know the Haka is a really popular thing. I wish it was around when I had kids. For one side, for the letdown while breastfeeding. Is that okay?
I'm going to say a qualified yes. It is it's a really nifty device, I will say. And I will also preface my answer with, when people reach out to us after they've gone home, it's because they're having a concern. So I tend to see the concerns, and that may bias my answer. If you need to be pumping to increase your milk supply, the Haka may not be adequate, because it does, it isn't, it's a little bit more passive. On the other hand, if you're having an oversupply and you're burdened by too much milk, using the Haka to catch quote unquote drip milk that may be leaking will actually, in many cases, cause your body to release even more milk because there is some vacuum applied. So depending on what you're using it for, it can be a real convenient way to just collect a little bit of milk when you're feeding. I would suggest using it on the second breast, actually, if your baby's feeding at both breasts at each feeding. So it's kind of individual. And I'm sorry that's not a more precise answer, but you just want to be careful you're not causing your body to make more and more milk than you need, because that can become a problem as well. But it can be a great way to catch a little bit and save it.
Anyone have anything to add to that? I think that was a great answer, and that's what I've heard as well. But I know as far as, I had this like plastic thing, didn't provide any suction, but it just caught the excess milk on the other side that you're nursing on. And it was like, I don't know, I mean, I produced so many ounces before I ever needed to start pumping just from that, which was really, really great. Anybody want to add to that, or was that
No, I just wanted to add, I think I know what you're talking about. Those are called milk savers. And yeah, for that reason, I do kind of recommend softly to clients that are having that problem. Like they don't want to waste milk or, lose any milk or whatever. And yeah, it doesn't apply any kind of pressure. So it's not causing, like Cindy was saying, kind of more milk to come in. So those are actually pretty awesome. And you can get those anywhere.
I loved mine. That was like my son, when I had my second son, that was my son's duty, was to go get that. And when I was getting ready for breastfeeding, that's the other thing I was going to say, is with siblings and such like that, you want to give them jobs.
Give them a job.
Really, they want to help out too. They want to support mama. So with that, I think, I know we went 7 minutes over, so I apologize for going over to all the panelists. I do want to say all of the panelists today are on the front lines with the current pandemic. So I want to give a round of applause. You're only going to hear me, but I think everyone else who's on the line is also giving a round of applause. So thank you so much for everything that you do. And thank you for joining us on your weekend. You're already working crazy hours. So I just want to thank you all for doing this. And I'm looking forward to doing more of this.